How's everyone doing today? Good? You ready to talk about weddings? All right. So we'll jump right in. Quick introduction. I am as Michael mentioned, a New York-based wedding portrait and portrait photographer. And I have been photographing weddings for 9 years now. And today I'm going to share a little bit about what it looks like from the photographer's perspective, what the wedding day looks like from a wedding photographer's perspective. A little about the types of weddings that I photograph. I photograph a lot of large multicultural weddings, blended family weddings. I'm talking the type of weddings that have 20 people, 20 bridesmaids and 20 groomsmen. And in my course of being a wedding photographer, I have seen a lot, I've encountered a lot, and I've experienced a lot. And even with all of that experience, there is always a curveball or a new experience that I encounter with each and every wedding. But before we jump into the wedding day walkthrough, let's talk what's in my bag. As a wedding photographer, one thing I learned that it's very important to be prepared, if not prepared, over-prepared. And so while my philosophy is to travel light, I typically show up on the wedding day with the camera harness, double harness, 2 cameras on my body ready to work, light setup, already set up and ready to go. But in my kit, I have backups is the name of the game. So 2 of everything, multiple lenses. I am a Sony Artisan of Imagery, so I am Team Sony, so you will find me, hey! Right now, what I have as my go-to on my hip is the A7R5 and the Sony A1. I love primes, and so I typically will have a medium telephoto and an ultra-wide lens ready to go. And that's just kind of what I've narrowed it down to that fits my shooting style. But even though I know what I need, I am always prepared, and so I bring all the things. So I want to know who's here with me today. Are there wedding photographers in this room by show of hands? Okay, so we're talking to a fair amount of non-wedding photographers just here as well. Okay, it looks almost split. Well, my wedding photographers in the room may be able to relate to this sentiment. At what point in the wedding day when you're working a wedding do you breathe a sigh of relief? I'll share my answer to that question a little bit later on. But if you're a wedding photographer, you know I've photographed hundreds of weddings. And each and every wedding I still show up with butterflies in my stomach. And while I know what I'm doing, there is a point in the day where I exhale because now I know I'm coasting. I feel a little bit more in control because one thing about weddings is that weddings, although we get hired to photograph them and it's a transaction, weddings are also highly personal. Weddings are an interesting blend of chaos and predictability. So if you photographed a few weddings, you know that you can begin to anticipate what will happen and when, and you know that things tend to unfold in a linear format. But there's also the element of chaos. So before I even walk you through what a typical wedding day looks like for me photographing large weddings, I want to share the 4 things that I prepare for before I even show up on the wedding day. So the first thing that I plan for are the people. The people that we are going to encounter on the wedding day are going to be our collaborators. Those are the vendors, like the videographers that we like to tussle with for a good spot during the ceremony. The wedding planners, the other people who the couple has hired to make their day come together. We also are going to encounter the client and the people they choose to have as a part of their wedding, the participants, and we're going to encounter bystanders, our guests. All of these people are part of the story. And so one of the big things that I like to do is to get a feel for who the people are. I do this because they are the secret ingredient to creating a collection of wedding images that truly reflect the client, and creating a collection of final images that tell their story in a way that doesn't feel copy and paste. The people are the secret ingredient to they are the factor that will set this wedding apart from all others. And so one of the things that I do when I'm preparing to work with people is gather information. Gather information because that helps me to get all the intel I need before I even show up. And I do this through questionnaires. I do this through just basically being very, very curious, very, very nosy. And my questionnaires are like the things that I'm personally curious about. I don't photograph weddings without doing an engagement session. I try to avoid that unless it's a very intimate wedding. And the reason for this is it gives us an opportunity to work together. I learn so much about the client, and it's all a part of my information gathering process. The other thing I do before I show up for the wedding day is I provide information. One thing we have to remember about weddings is that chances are this is the client's first time getting married, first, maybe second. But for us, we have seen many weddings, whether you're like me and have photographed hundreds of weddings, or you've got 5 or 6 or 7 under your belt. You have way more than the client does. And so we are uniquely positioned to know what we need and when. I provide information to the clients, but I also provide information to the people that are going to be working with me. I keep my team small, and so we've learned each other over the course of years, actually, that we've been working together, but there does come occasion where I need to work with someone who I don't typically work with. And so providing information through the form of what to expect, PDFs, kind of outlining what the expectation is, kind of outlining how I show up on the wedding day. So providing information is a key part of preparing before I even show up on the wedding day. Observation is another big part of my process. I'm nosy, but I'm also a watcher. And I think many photographers, you become photographers because you're very observant. We are people watchers. We are watchers of our environment. And observation is one of the most powerful tools you can do to get a crash course on who people are, whether it be before the wedding day and even when you show up. So when I show up on the wedding day and in a getting ready space, I'm looking at the people around me, I'm listening, and I'm observing to see what the relationship dynamics are like and who the key players are, who's the person that's most likely to cry, who's the person that's most likely to be my ally when I need everyone to pay attention. Observation is a great information tool for preparing for the wedding day. Time. I'm planning ahead and thinking about time. Now, show of hands, how many of you have had couples that have their wedding, they've spent months, some of them years, planning this day, and they give you this either they or their planner give you a very detailed and complex timeline for their wedding day. Have you ever received something like that? And it's interesting to me that the wedding photographer's room, I see few hands, and that's the thing about weddings. I work with these larger weddings, which tend to have planners in many instances, or to have highly organized people because they're pouring a lot into this day. And I get these complex, wonderful timelines, and then other times, I get absolutely nothing. And they look to their vendors to to guide them, or they may not even be aware of the fact that they need to kind of have a map of the day. And so in those instances, when I'm planning and preparing for time, I don't create timelines because I believe in wearing the hat that I've been commissioned to wear, which is photographer. However, there are certain information that we will need in order to be successful, for the outcome to be successful. So I use forms and questionnaires to get the client thinking about the format for the day, so that at a minimum, I have an outline of where their mind is at and how they see the flow of their wedding day unfolding. I'm also thinking and planning the environment, thinking about the environment ahead of time, before I show up. And this is super important. I think that a lot of couples put a lot of focus and attention on the main events for their wedding day. Their ceremony, where's their ceremony going to happen? Where's the reception going to happen? And they pick a beautiful, pretty location for their reception, or they pick a beautiful, pretty location for their ceremony, and then they forget about how significant a chunk of the day they will spend in their prep space, whether that's a hotel room, a bridal suite at the venue. And so this is where I have conversations with the client in advance about the environment for their wedding day, making sure that the environment, that the aesthetic or what they envision for the final outcome of their photos matches up with the environment that they chose to have their wedding. So if, for example, if I have a client, and this is all a part of information gathering, that during the information gathering part of our interactions, I'm picking up that they really love bold color. They've got all these bright images, lots of window light, lots of bright light, but they've chosen a venue that is speakeasy and moody. Or they have a hotel room that has no windows. I'm thinking about the environment in advance to manage expectations in terms of how the final collection of photos will look, and so that we can have a conversation about their vision matching up with the environment that everything will happen. Another thing that I'm planning for when it comes to the environment, and this pertains in particular to the getting ready part of the day, is that I'm putting it on their radar, things that they may not be aware of. So if you've ever walked into a prep space, whether it's with the groomsmen or the bride and bridesmaids, chances are, I'd say 9 times out of 10, the environment will be pure chaos. Even in all the planning and having enough space, when you put 6, 7, 8 people in the same space getting ready, then things manage to get messy. And this goes back to the client's vision for their wedding story. So I wouldn't say that I'm a documentary wedding photographer, because I do a lot of curating. I curate the environment, I relocate moments to the extent that it isn't interfering with the day. And so if I have a client that I know really wants what they saw in my portfolio, or they want the moment stuff, but they also want very clean, curated aesthetic for their final wedding story, then I'm putting it on their radar before I even show up. I'm asking for what I need. So some of what I need would be, or what they need, is to designate a space for these photo moments, to have a clutter-free zone to the extent possible, to get ready in a separate space from everyone else. So these are kind of some of the things that I'm planning for before I even show up. Because, for example, when it comes to the prep space, many instances, this is what they imagine. My brides and even and grooms, they will be in a space and they imagine these beautiful, peaceful, serene moments of them putting on their earrings, putting on their shoes, and doing their finishing touches. And the reality is that in many instances, this is what it looks like. And we need this too. I love capturing these types of photos as a part of prep, but I also know with the clients that I work with that this is not what they imagine. And while they will appreciate the photos of dad wrestling shoes onto the little ring bearer, they really want some of those serene, curated moments to be captured as well. Light. Now this is a big one. And I don't know who said this, but a friend of mine said that, once told me, she's like, wedding photographers are the Swiss Army knives of the photography industry. And that is, true words have never been spoken, because when it comes to light, we encounter it all. In a single wedding day, we can encounter window light. Typically, we show up in a beautiful hotel suite, and it's bright, window lit. But we can also encounter scenarios with window light where we don't have control over the direction or where it's coming from, like a ceremony that is completely backlit by wall-to-wall windows, or window light that is giving you deep shadows and high contrast. We can also encounter ambient light, full sun, overcast. This is all in one wedding day. An indoor space with 30-foot ceilings and dark walls and nightscapes. As wedding photographers, when it comes to light, we need to be prepared for a range of possibilities. And we need to be prepared in a way that will allow us to deliver a final collection of images that looks cohesive, looks like the photos were captured on the same day and all a part of the same story. So some of the things that I prepare is that I use a system. I have a go-to system. And this doesn't sound very exciting or fun, but having a system means that you know what works and you make sure that you have that on hand. Bring your studio. Now, we work on location and it's an uncontrolled environment, but we live in a time where we have so many options available for highly portable lighting systems. And so I bring everything but the kitchen sink, even though I like to travel light. And I'm prepared. So I do have larger modifiers as well as smaller portable ones. And I have strobes, and even though I prefer to work primarily with flash. And you'll want to be able to improvise. Weddings are full of lighting curveballs. Things happen when you least expect them, and you have to be able to pivot in the moment and think on your feet. And so practicing different ways to shape and control light or work with less is a skill that serves wedding photographers really well. So now that we've talked about how I prepare before we show up, I'm going to walk you through what a typical wedding day looks like for me. Starting with getting ready. So when I show up, the first thing I like to do is start with details. And it's interesting, I would say 90% of the couples we work with want detail shots. A lot of these end up in the wedding album, and I'm always thinking about the wedding album. I'm thinking about how this will look at the end when everything is over and we lay it out in an album. So I start with detail shots, and in preparation, some of the things I ask for before I even start photographing details is for the couple to have them ready and placed and designated somewhere on the side. And by ready, I mean, one of the things I noticed that are sneaky time eaters when it comes to weddings and even photographing details is that sometimes you show up and the earrings still have tags on them, the dress is still in the garment bag, it's not steamed yet. Little things like that are sneaky time eaters. They also open up the possibility, if you're anything like me, I'm clumsy, a little bit of a ruffian, it opens up the possibility for you as a photographer to potentially damage something. If I'm trying to fiddle things, stickers and tags off of things. I personally, as a policy, avoid handling the dress. A lot of our brides pour a very huge budget into their dress. And so I usually commission someone to help me, and not someone from my team, but someone that from the couple's family or their orbit. So it's usually a bridesmaid, and they unpackage the dress. And I ask that that's done before we even start so that they're getting the most efficient use out of the time that they booked me for. And so I arrive and things are ready to go, and I have somebody that the bride designated to help me with those things. And this includes the groom's details, his rings, his watches, things of value. I asked for a buddy system and for someone to handle them for me. And I start with those. My getting ready, my approach to weddings in general is equal parts curated and scripted. And so there are scripted moments like this that I will capture. And I also capture all of the anticipation and the nerves. I do a lot of stylized robe shots, and this is something that I show in my portfolio. So the clients who come to me are going to be looking for these moments. But I also am telling a story. So the getting ready part of the day is showing what happened before they even walk down the aisle. It's important, I believe it's important to split my attentions between both curated and documenting some of the just mundane things that happen, having slices of pizza, some of these things, just being in the back of the bus or van, being transported to the ceremony, these are all a part of the story, and so that falls under my getting ready umbrella. First look, first touch, and bride reveals. So these days, tradition is that we have a first look. Used to be that was a controversial thing, and that is typically what's happening after the getting ready. We are walking into a first look. For my couples that are adamant about, that don't want to see each other, we also do reveals with their bridesmaids or reveals with their parents. And so that's typically what would happen next in the flow of the day, is that we are carving out a spot for this moment, and we're making it a moment, because there are still some people who feel conflicted about it kind of diluting their moment during the ceremony. But the first look can be a really beautiful time for the bride and groom, and it can be just as special as seeing each other in the aisle. And if you're anything, I think most vendors, actually, we are team first look, because we know that the flow of the day logistically just goes smoother when we get the formalities out of the way. And our couples will often look to us for opinions about whether or not they should do them, those who are on the fence. And even though I'm biased, I try to give them the pros and cons and let them arrive at their own decision. But I would say 80% of my weddings, majority of them, if I had to assign a percentage, it would be high, there is a first look or some kind of reveal that happens before the ceremony. And then we're rolling into portraits right after. If I have a couple that is not seeing each other, there's the first touch where they kind of, sometimes they'll come together without seeing, it might be blindfold or it might be on two sides of a door. We still do portraits, designate some time to do portraits, and if anybody knows anything about weddings, you want to grab as many opportunities as you can to get those shot list things done. And so when our couples are not seeing each other, I do portraits with the bride and her side of the family, or the couple, each of the members of the couple and their sides of the family. I'll do those separate photo ops because it saves us time as the flow of the day goes through. My approach to portraits is to 20% tradition, 80% posing for creativity or pushing to try something new, and posing for classic and timeless poses is something that we can do in 0 to 60 seconds. So I usually will start the flow of the portraits by doing some classic poses. I will work with the wedding party, and if you know anything, how many of you photograph, show of hands, very large weddings? A few. Okay, so for those who don't photograph very large weddings or any familiarity with what that's like, having anything more than, I'd say, 3 people on each side. The moment that you start to have a larger wedding party, it impacts time in ways that you cannot imagine. I always joke that it can take an hour to move from one side of the street to the next side of the street if you have a wedding party with 10 bridesmaids and 10 groomsmen, because of the distraction factor. There's always these sneaky little time eaters the larger the group. And so when someone tells me that they have 14 bridesmaids and 14 groomsmen, or the better of 10 on each side, whatever that number is, if it's large, that weighs in the favor of doing a first look. And if they're really adamant about not doing a first look, we're still blocking time to get these portraits done with the wedding party. And that cuts back on, that allows me to freeze up some time for me to not be rushed with the couple. And I usually start with the wedding party first and send everyone away so that we can have private time with the couple. If at all possible, I also like to get the family portraits done before the ceremony, which doesn't always happen because we are reliant on people showing up really early for the ceremony. But to the extent that it works out, I am doing family portraits after I finish with all of the other formalities. Now, for the ceremony, I'm typically planting myself to the right of the groom or whoever is waiting at the top of the aisle, bride or groom. And I plant myself to the right of them so that I'm in a position to both photograph the processional and capture reactions. And I am working with a second photographer, so we get another perspective. And that's one of the expectations of working with second photographers, is that I'm not just looking for insurance on those moments. I'm looking for you to feel free to try and push your perspective and do the things that I, the main photographer, may be limited in doing because I have the responsibility to deliver on the contract. And so that's how we position ourselves. I position myself for reaction so that I can capture both the bride coming towards me or the processional and also little moments like this. I move around during the ceremony. I don't plant myself in any one spot because there are so many things and layers of things that are typically happening during a wedding ceremony. We've got guest reactions. We've got the main event at the top of the aisle, but we've got lots of little things happening in between. I'm paying attention to key family members who I observed from earlier, and sometimes I'll put it on the radar of my team members, like that one's going to cry. That one makes a lot of faces. And we already kind of have our eyes panning for the people and that we know something's going to happen. Cocktail hour. Very rarely am I taking pictures of actual cocktail hour. I mean, on occasion, I get to be present for some or part of cocktail hour. But I call this the makeup hour. Anybody relate? Do you know what I mean by makeup hour? When things go off script, we'll call it off script and not say chaos, in the earlier part of the day, it can cause a trickle-down effect that kind of puts you in catch-up mode. And back to my earlier question, I still haven't exhaled at this point. I have not yet exhaled at cocktail hour. So cocktail hour is the makeup hour. It's the hour where whatever you didn't get to do earlier in the day, now you get to do it. The thing about cocktail hour is that the couple typically wants to be present for part of it. And so it's not ever truly fully an hour that you have. It's more like 40 minutes. But in that time, I am doing any portraits that I didn't capture earlier. And for weddings that have beautiful decor, we pop into the reception room and capture ballroom shots during cocktail hour because that's our opportunity to get it before the guests come in. Cocktail hour is sometimes used for the entirety of all the things that we need to capture in terms of formalities for couples that don't have a first look. The reception. And if you haven't guessed it by now, this is where I exhale. Any guesses as to why I probably exhale at this point? I think the big thing for me is that we are now in a controlled setting. We're not going anywhere. We're not moving from point A to B. There's no potential for someone to get stuck in traffic going from one location to the next, or there's no shifting light during the ceremony because we're outdoor at noon and it's shaded one moment and it's hard shadows going across the couple's face the next moment. We're now in a control setting that I can light. We're now in a setting where I know what is going to happen, and I exhale because I've gotten through the intensity of the day. This is the part where I believe that I enjoy, even though I really love the early morning parts of the wedding day, this is the part where everyone lets their hair down and they eat and they drink and they celebrate. And while there are still important formalities to be captured, we're not going anywhere. And I love this. First dance, toast, everything is happening under the same roof, in the same environment, and depending on what type of space I'm in, I set my light, and I can move and flow around as needed. But the curveballs come down to a minimum. The send-off. So the wedding often has that's a wrap moment, many of the weddings, and it's usually in the form of either some sort of celebratory send-off, whether it's a getaway car or some couples will have a Venetian hour, I believe it's called, with the elaborate dessert spread and fireball performances. Anyone seen those? Yes. The beloved sparkler exit. I have a love-hate relationship with sparkler exits, and they're pretty, and I always have to remind myself with moments like this that this is their first time, this is my bazillionth time, and so while I might be like, oh, sparkler exit, maybe this is what they've been dreaming of. They want to be sent off in a ring of fire by drunken guests. This is my recap of a typical sparkler exit. I don't know who thought it was a good idea to give guests that have been drinking for several hours fire to play with, but we do. It's become a sort of staple at many weddings. In fact, I had a couple last year whose wedding was disrupted by a venue fire and it had to be canceled. They redid their wedding. It wasn't because of sparklers. They redid their wedding and they did all the fire. They did sparklers inside on the dance floor. They did sparklers outside. It can be chaotic. It can be difficult to light. And so when it comes to the send-offs like these where it's happening outside, I like to get out there before everyone else, kind of set my light, prepare for where I need to be, and then and be movable, be portable, because things can switch and change in a heartbeat. Sparklers, you have a narrow window to capture them because they fizzle out, and on those times when we coordinate it perfectly well, it's a beautiful photo op, it's a beautiful moment, and preparation is just king. So whether I use a constant light in some instances, or an off-camera flash, I get out there before everyone so that I'm set and ready, and I'm usually working with an assistant holding the light so that if the moment is moved or shifted, which has happened, where we say the sparkler exit is happening here, when on second thought it's happening there, I am ready and movable and able to keep up with the pace of the switches and changes. And that's what it looks like for me on a typical wedding day. That is the flow of a wedding day. I would love to open up the floor for any questions before I wrap up. If there are any questions, please don't be bashful. Yes, right there.
So how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Okay, so I came all the way from Trinidad just for this expo.
Wow, welcome.
Yes. Thank you, thank you. Well, I also do professional wedding photography, video productions for weddings and stuff like that. You spoke about controlling time. Mm-hmm. And one of the most difficult thing is control any time with other contractors, even for the wedding preparation. You know, the makeup artist say to do this in a half an hour, take an hour, how long, and then the client still expect you to deliver the high quality images in 2 minutes. I know sometimes it takes a lot longer time to
Yes.
organize. How do you deal with that personally?
So, and that's a great, great, great question, because that is the nature of wedding photography, right? What the couple, and I'll repeat your question, what the couple is left with after all is said and done is the photos. And in many instances, people get amnesia about how the day unfolded, right? And weddings, there's no one person in control of anything. We're all cogs in the wheel. Weddings are a whole bunch of tiny little interdependent cogs in the wheel, depending on each other for everything to go smoothly. So that means if the makeup artist is just a hair late on doing one face, it can cause a trickle-down effect for the rest of the day. Or if a bridesmaid can't find her contact lens and we delayed 10 minutes in getting the car. Or in this case, as you mentioned, wedding vendors. We mentioned makeup artists or, wedding vendors, we've had things happen where something was delivered late or things just don't go as they were originally planned. So what happens then? So this is one of the skills of being a professional wedding photographer, is that you learn how to improvise and work fast. Those are not ideal conditions. Now I can do a stylized portrait of a 30-person wedding party in 2 minutes. I can do that. It's better if I do it with 10, right? And so you get a different result. But the key to answer your question for me is I find is getting out in front of expectations beforehand. Just basically saying, like, this is what we're here for. We are going to do what we do. You're going to still improvise and provide capture what happens, but you don't control what happens, right? And so some of the things you can do, and I believe in positive phrasing, so we don't want to be doom and gloom, but we want to I encourage and recommend that the couple work with a planner or a coordinator, even a professional one. There are some photographers I know that won't do a wedding that doesn't have a planner involved because of how impactful it can be when things go off script or things don't go right. And the couple is getting married. That's not where their focus is. So one of the things you can do is have a list of vendors that you recommend for planning and talk to people, find out price points so that you can recommend people that match budgets with people and things like that. And then another thing I do is on the wedding day, I am constantly communicating. Ultimately, there is the amnesia factor that can always happen, but I believe strongly in the moment calling attention to things that are happening as they unfold. So the power of simply calling attention to let's say we're setting up a group shot and there are cell phones out and people are taking selfies and you need them to sit, calling their attention to that. Positive phrasing and saying, I just need 60 seconds. If we can put phones, calling attention to the moment or calling attention into the moment that something has gone off script and now we're going to switch the plan. So it's about communication, and honestly, the biggest thing I think that sets you up for success with weddings in particular is when they have a professional involved in mapping out the flow of the day. Anyone else? Yes,
Okay.
right here in front.
Just me personally, well, I exhale when I back up the images on the computer.
Oh, yes, that's a good one. That's a great question. The question was, how do you deal with a family member or even a client that wants to micromanage you? The key is boundary setting, honestly, and rapport building. So more so than rapport building goes a long way. Your clients should be your allies. Your clients should be your partners in crime, right? And so I've had a momzilla. I had a mom that made me actually want to quit photographing weddings. Terrorized me the whole wedding day, but my client was my ally. And I was able to while it wasn't ideal situation, I was able to do what I do. And yes, in terms of backups, I've had a lot of some things happen. I've had driving to the wedding and coffee spill over all over my clothes and actually needing to show up in sweatpants if I didn't have a backup outfit. So I have change of clothes, backups of everything. And little mishaps will teach you the things that you need to be prepared for. There was a question there with the mic.
Okay, yes. How do you find is the best way with, like sometimes you have the bridesmaids and the groomsmen at different places getting ready, so like 15 to 20 minutes away from each other. So you're wanting to get the bridesmaids in their gowns, and then also when they're fully ready, and we all know like that time can often take a long time, like just the gowns into dresses. So yeah, like going between the groomsmen and the bridesmaids, and then also the amount of time for just the getting ready, like not, if they're not doing a reveal and they're not doing family photos, how much time would you normally allocate for that?
So, great question. I don't float between the bride and groom if they're in separate places. I have a second photographer who has, the people who second shoot for me have been our former mentees, and so they know how to match style. They know the kind of like the aesthetic. We communicate about like, hey, what does the room look like? All right, I'm using these kind of textures or backdrops so that our detail shots look cohesive across the two different spaces. But only time I float between the couple's two spaces is if they're in the same building. For the most part, I think it's more efficient when it comes to that part of the day for there to be one photographer designated in one space, because otherwise you're doing a disservice to the, you're not, I wouldn't say disservice, but you're not fully getting all of the story if you're kind of moving back and forth. It's good to just be kind of stationed. And so that's what I do when it comes to them being in separate places. And I'm sorry, I lost the second half of your question. You meant, oh, how much time? So what I do, and this is part of the preparation when I'm providing information, I have timelines that I want to have. There's want versus need. I need 60 seconds. I can work fast. I talk about this when it comes to posing or just in general, is that there are certain things that each and every one of you have done so many times that you could do it in your sleep. And so those are the things I can do first, and those are the things that I can do a bridesmaids, I can do the entire wedding party fast. Are they getting the full Kesha experience when I work fast? No. So what I do is I tell them, this is what I recommend. 2 hours for getting ready, a minimum of 1 hour. Depending on your wedding party size, I give them a suggested amount of time to block for the portrait. So if they have a smaller wedding party, I say block 1 hour. If they have a larger wedding party, block 2. I tell them in advance how much time I need, but when things go off script, I go into my autopilot mode or to my default mode. We should all have one, because even though we are creatives, we are providing a service, and this goes against my what I speak is wanting to provide a signature for each and every one of my couples, but also they're hiring me for a service. And so when things go off script, I go into my autopilot mode, these are the things I can do fast, that I can deliver. They're gonna love it because it's gonna still be pretty. I might not be, doing fireworks and whatever, but I'm gonna deliver something that they love, and I'm gonna be able to execute it really fast. And so we should all have that kind of default mode as our backup system in case things go wrong. Yes, right here.
Hi, thank you for sharing. What would be your 2 questions in your questionnaire before the wedding day, except of family shot list, to really understand the couple and get their vision, what they would like to see in their wedding album, so you could get to know them better?
So I'll repeat your question. You said, what are like my questions that I ask?
Like in your questionnaire, you give 2 questions that helps you to
Understand the couple.
couple's vision for their wedding day, that you would capture it in the ways that they are envisioning it.
I'll tell you the 2 things that are most helpful. They're on the form. One, I ask them to give me their Instagram handle, and I stalk them. Permission to stalk them. Permission to look at your Instagram or whatever social account, because it tells me so much. It tells me like what kind of photos they post of themselves, gives me a window into their mind, how they see themselves. And in terms of the aesthetic for the wedding, I ask them to share their vision board. And I always tell them I don't do copy and paste. I'm not going to replicate. I don't do replication. But most couples, especially planning big ones, they have a Pinterest board. And so I ask them to drop a link to that. And I asked a ton of other questions. I asked very specific questions. I asked colors, aesthetics, vibe, what mood you're going for, you know, if you had to give your wedding a movie title, what would it be? I have a broad range of like, from silly to very direct questions. Are there any things that I need to be aware of? Things like that. But the most helpful thing is seeing a window into what excites them. You know, and also it could also ring an alarm, because if you see something that doesn't match up, not even ring alarm, it's so helpful because it can help you to kind of prepare and have those conversations so that it sets you up for success on the wedding day. Do we have time? We have time for one more. Yes, right here. Sorry, and I'll please feel free to say hello after.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm looking through all your images as you were speaking, and the lighting is amazing on
Thank you.
everything. So technically, I'm just curious, do you have any thoughts on maybe more of a technical aspect of your lighting, like what you use to fill rooms and, you know, just general, you know.
Yeah, so, and I hope this doesn't disappoint you. Now, my viewpoint towards light is that it is, like, if you're an artist, it's one of the tools, one of the most important tools that you can use to shape and craft an image, right? I am also practical, so I like to work, I'm a minimalist. I like to work with one light. And so a lot of times I'm looking to the environment first. I am really good at finding and using light, and then I add in created light. And I mentioned earlier that I bring everything from but the kitchen sink. So I work with a lot of one light setups where I'm mixing, whether it's window or ambient, with my off camera. I also will do lighting composites, even though I didn't show any in this slideshow. So, but that's for efficiency's sake. I like the look of a multi-light setup, but I want to do it with one light. And so sometimes, everyone know what a lighting composite, where I'm just using the one light to light different sections of the image. So I do things like that as well. I am prepared for, so I will on occasion use larger, like I'll use large umbrellas or more powerful strobes at weddings. But I would, if I had to assign a percentage, I'd say 60% of the time I'm working with one light, or I'm working 1 to 2 lights. And off camera, now in larger reception spaces that are more controlled, I'll set up more lights, especially if it's a big space with high ceilings. I'll set up, you know, depending on where I want my light to be, I'll station some lights throughout the room. That's probably the only scenario, because I'm not moving around, where I'll use more lights. But that's kind of my go-to. Well, thank you, everyone. This is where you can find me. Thank you so much. I appreciate you being here. If you want to keep up with me, find out what's next, I have workshops and conferences and things that we'll be a part of.